The following account is based on the expedition journals of Thomas Caldwell, naturalist and member of the 1911 Henderson expedition into the uncharted regions of the Amazon basin. What follows are his words, transcribed exactly as they appeared in his personal diary, discovered 40 years after the expedition's ill-fated return. I should have known better than to ignore the warnings, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, when the world still made sense, when science and reason were my only gods, and when the idea of something prehistoric lurking in the green hell of the Amazon seemed like nothing more than native superstition and the fevered imaginings of sun-addled explorers. Before we continue, make sure to leave a like and let us know where you're watching from. Have you ever felt like you were being watched in the wilderness? It was March of 1911 when our expedition set out from Manaus. There were 8 of us initially: Dr. Edmund Henderson, our expedition leader, and a renowned paleontologist from Cambridge. His colleague, Dr. James Pritchard, a geologist, myself, Thomas Caldwell, serving as naturalist and botanist, Robert Chen, our photographer and documentarian, and 4 experienced rivermen we'd hired from the docks, hardened men who knew the Amazon's temperament better than they knew their own mothers. The mission was simple, at least on paper: penetrate deep into the unexplored tributaries of the Rio Negro, catalog new species, map the uncharted territories, and investigate reports, rumors really, of unusual fauna spotted by rubber tappers working the most remote regions of the basin. Those first 2 weeks were exactly what I'd expected. Brutal, yes, but manageable. We traveled by a large canoe and a smaller support boat, moving against the current, our rivermen, Paulo, Miguel, Carlos, and the youngest, João, working in shifts to propel us deeper into the interior. The heat was oppressive, a living thing that wrapped around you like a wet wool blanket. The air itself seemed to have weight, pressing down on your chest, making each breath a conscious effort. The jungle was a wall of green on either side of us, an impenetrable fortress of vegetation that seemed to mock our intrusion. During the day, it screamed with life: howler monkeys announcing our presence, macaws painting streaks of color across the canopy, insects creating a symphony of clicks and buzzes that never ceased. At night, different sounds emerged: the deep cough of jaguars, the splash of caiman sliding into the water, things we couldn't identify moving through the undergrowth. Dr. Henderson was in his element, constantly scribbling notes, collecting samples, theorizing about what we might find. He was a tall man, angular and intense, with eyes that seemed to look through you rather than at you. He'd spent his entire career searching for proof that isolated pockets of prehistoric life might have survived in the world's most remote regions. The Amazon, he believed, was the most likely candidate. "Consider the coelacanth, Caldwell," he'd say, pacing the small cleared area of our camp. "A fish thought extinct for 65 million years, yet discovered alive and well in 1938. If a creature like that can survive undetected in the ocean depths, why not something larger in a place as vast and unexplored as this?" I'd humor him, of course. Henderson was brilliant, if somewhat obsessive. But privately, I thought his theories bordered on fantasy. I was there for the plants, the insects, the very real and very fascinating biodiversity that we knew existed in these jungles. Dinosaurs were the stuff of museum skeletons and artist renderings, not living, breathing creatures. Pritchard shared my skepticism, though he was more diplomatic about it. Chen simply didn't care either way. He was there to document whatever we found, prehistoric or otherwise. The rivermen never spoke about it at all, at least not in English. But I noticed them talking among themselves, especially as we moved deeper into the tributary that Henderson had selected based on reports from a rubber tapper named Silvera, who'd stumbled out of the jungle 6 months prior, half dead and raving about a monstro he'd encountered near a lagoon fed by a blackwater river. It was Paolo, the oldest of our rivermen, and the one who spoke the best English, who first tried to warn us. We'd been traveling for 13 days when we reached a point where the tributary forked. Henderson was consulting his maps, crude things based on third-hand information, trying to determine which branch matched Silvera's description. Paolo approached him, hat literally in hand, his weathered face creased with worry. "Dr. Henderson," he said, his accent thick but his words careful. "The men, we do not want to go further on the left fork." Henderson looked up from his maps, irritation flickering across his face. "Why not?" Paolo shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "The caboclos, the river people who live in this region, they say that path leads to Agua Preta, the Blackwater Lagoon. They say it is forbidden, dangerous." "Dangerous how?" Pritchard asked, more curious than concerned. "Hostile natives?" "No, senor. No people go there. Not for many generations. They say..." Paolo paused, searching for words. "They say the old world still lives there. The world before men. They say there is a creature, a great creature that has lived since the time of the giants. They call it Mapinguari, or sometimes Besta Grande." Henderson's eyes lit up, not with fear but with excitement. "What kind of creature?" Paolo shook his head. "The stories, they change. Some say it walks on 2 legs, tall as 3 men. Some say it has a great mouth in its belly. Some say it cannot be killed by arrows or bullets. All agree it is terrible to see, and that its cry..." He paused again. "Its cry is like nothing else in the jungle. When you hear it, you must run, or you will not leave the Blackwater Lagoon alive." There was a moment of silence. Then Henderson smiled, that particular smile of his that I'd come to recognize, the one that meant he'd made up his mind and nothing would sway him. "Superstition," he said, not unkindly. "I appreciate the warning, Paolo, truly. But surely you've been in this business long enough to know that every remote region has its monster stories. The locals here are simply protecting their territory, or perhaps they fear what they don't understand." "With respect, Doctor," Paolo said, and I could hear the strain in his voice. "I have worked this river for 23 years. I have seen many things. Anacondas big enough to swallow a capybara whole, jaguars that hunt men, poison frogs, electric eels, piranha that can strip flesh from bone. These things are real, and I do not fear them because I understand them." He took a breath, meeting Henderson's eyes directly. "But I have also heard the cry. 3 years ago, working for another expedition, we came close to this place. We heard it at night. It was..." He struggled for the word. "It was wrong, senor. Wrong in a way that makes your blood know, even if your mind does not, that you are hearing something that should not be." The jungle around us seemed to grow quieter as he spoke, as if listening. "Did you see anything?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. Paolo shook his head slowly. "No. We left before dawn, even though the expedition leader wanted to stay. But Miguel," he nodded toward one of the other rivermen, "his cousin worked for the rubber company. He was with Silvera when he saw it. Silvera survived. Miguel's cousin did not. They found his body 3 weeks later, or what was left of it. But Silvera, he was never the same. He still screams in his sleep, they say. Henderson's expression had hardened. I'm paying you and your men good money to take us where we need to go, not to repeat campfire stories. We're scientists. We came here to investigate exactly these kinds of reports. If there's something unusual in that lagoon, we need to document it. Paolo looked at each of us in turn, perhaps hoping to find an ally. He found only varying degrees of skepticism and scientific curiosity. Finally, his shoulders sagged slightly in resignation. As you wish, Doctor, but do not say we did not warn you. He walked back to the other rivermen, and I watched as they had a heated discussion in rapid Portuguese. João, the youngest, looked terrified. Miguel kept shaking his head. Carlos was silent, his jaw set. But eventually, they all nodded. They needed the money, I supposed. Or perhaps they feared disappointing Henderson more than they feared some jungle legend. We took the left fork. The change was subtle at first. The water darkened, taking on that tea-colored tint that comes from tannins leaching out of decaying vegetation. The blackwater rivers of the Amazon are strange
places, beautiful but unsettling, with visibility that drops to nearly nothing beneath the surface. The jungle on either side seemed to grow denser, the canopy overhead thicker, reducing the sunlight to a dim green glow even in the middle of the day. And it was quieter. That's what I noticed most. The usual cacophony of jungle life seemed muted, as if someone had turned down the volume on the world. The birds called less frequently, the monkeys stayed hidden, even the insects seemed more subdued. "Notice anything odd about the ecosystem here?" Pritchard asked me quietly as we drifted along with the current, the rivermen paddling steadily. I nodded. "Reduced biodiversity indicators. Could be the water chemistry or something else," he finished. That night we made camp on a small sandbar near where the river widened slightly. The rivermen worked quickly and efficiently, barely speaking. They built our fires larger than usual, I noticed, and positioned them in a full circle around our camp rather than the usual single central fire. As darkness fell and we ate our meal of dried meat and manioc flour, Henderson regaled us with stories of other legendary creatures that had turned out to be real. Gorillas, thought to be myths until properly documented. The okapi, rumored to be a rainforest unicorn. The Komodo dragon, dismissed as sailors' tales until scientists actually ventured to the Indonesian islands. "Tomorrow," he said, his face animated in the firelight, "we should reach the lagoon. And if even half of what Silvera reported is true, we may be on the verge of the greatest zoological discovery of the century. Perhaps any century." From beyond our circle of firelight, deep in the jungle, something called out. It wasn't any sound I recognized, and I'd spent enough time in the Amazon by then to know most of its voices. It was deep, resonant, somewhere between a roar and a bellow, but with an odd quality to it that I can only describe as hollow, as if it came from some vast cavity. The sound rolled over us, through us. I felt it in my chest, in my bones. Every man in camp froze. The jungle fell absolutely silent. And in that silence, I saw the expression on Paolo's face. The look of a man who has just heard his death sentence pronounced. "That," he whispered, "is the cry I told you about." It came again, closer this time, and I understood exactly what he'd meant when he said it was wrong. The cry didn't come a third time that night, but sleep was impossible. We sat around our fires, weapons close at hand. Not that our rifles would have provided much comfort if Henderson's theories were correct. What good is a .303 British against something that survived the extinction event that wiped out the rest of its kind? But we held them anyway, the weight of the metal providing a psychological comfort that our rational minds knew was probably false. Henderson, to his credit, didn't try to dismiss what we'd heard. Even his
scientific enthusiasm had been dampened by that sound. It was Chen who finally broke the silence. "That wasn't a jaguar," he said quietly, stating the obvious. "And it wasn't a howler monkey, or a caiman, or anything else I've heard in 3 years of working in South America." "No," Pritchard agreed. "It wasn't." Henderson was staring into the fire, his mind clearly racing. The acoustic properties were unusual. That resonance. It would require a substantial chest cavity, or possibly a specialized vocal structure. Sauropods, we believe, may have had elaborate nasal chambers that could produce low-frequency sounds for communication across vast distances. Sauropods were herbivores, though, weren't they? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The long-necked dinosaurs? Most of them, yes. But there were theropods, carnivores, that could have produced similar sounds. Allosaurus, perhaps, or... He paused, and I could see the wheels turning. There's no fossil evidence for vocal structures in most theropods, of course. Soft tissue doesn't preserve. But if we extrapolate from modern descendants, birds and crocodilians, it's entirely possible they could produce complex vocalizations. "Doctor," Paulo interrupted, his voice tight. "With respect, it does not matter what name you give it. The question is, do we continue?" All eyes turned to Henderson. In the firelight, his face looked older, more weathered. For a long moment, I thought, hoped, he might order us to turn back. We'd heard the cry. That was something. We could report it, let others mount a better-equipped expedition. But I saw the moment the decision crystallized in his eyes. "We continue," he said. "We're less than a day from the lagoon. We came here to investigate reports of unusual fauna, and now we have acoustic evidence that something out of the ordinary exists in this region. We'd be failing in our scientific duty to turn back now." Miguel stood up abruptly, speaking rapidly in Portuguese. Paulo translated, though his reluctance was evident. "Miguel says his family needs the money from this expedition, but not enough to die for it. He says the creature, whatever it is, has marked us now. It knows we are here. By calling out, it was warning us away from its territory. If we continue, it will see us as a threat." "And how does Miguel know this?" Henderson asked, not unkindly. Another rapid exchange. Paulo's face was grim. "His cousin, the one who died, he kept a journal. Miguel has it. He read it before joining this expedition. His cousin wrote that the creature called out the first night they came close to the lagoon. Silvera wanted to turn back, but the rubber company man in charge refused. The creature called again the second night, closer. And on the third night..." "What happened on the third night?" Chen asked. "It came into their camp." The fire crackled, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. The jungle around us remained eerily silent, as if every living thing was holding its breath. "And yet Silvera survived," Henderson pointed out. "Which suggests the creature, whatever it is, can be evaded, or perhaps even defended against." "Silvera survived because he ran," Paulo said flatly. "He left his companions and ran through the jungle in the dark, not caring about snakes or jaguars or anything else. He ran until he reached a native village 2 days later. The rubber company men and Miguel's cousin stayed to fight." He paused. "It did not go well for them." I found myself asking the question I wasn't sure I wanted answered. The journal. What did it say about the creature? What did it look like? Paulo spoke to Miguel again. The riverman went to his pack and pulled out a small, water-stained notebook. He flipped through it, found a page, and handed it to Paulo, who studied it for a moment before translating. He writes, "I saw it only for a moment in the firelight before everything went to hell. It walked on 2 legs, but it was no man. Too tall, maybe 4 meters or more. The body was thick, heavy with muscle. The head was wrong, too large, with jaws that I swear could bite a man in half. The eyes reflected our firelight like a caiman's eyes, but they were higher off the ground, much higher. It moved forward into our camp, and the ground shook with its steps. Cardoso fired his rifle directly into its chest, and I heard the bullet hit, but the creature didn't even slow down. It made a sound, not the call we'd heard before, but something else, a hiss or a roar, I couldn't tell which. Then it lunged forward, and Cardoso was gone, just gone. Silvera was screaming, running. I raised my rifle, but my hands were shaking too badly. That's when Paulo stopped reading. When what? Pritchard pressed. The entry ends there. Presumably that's when Miguel's cousin. He trailed off. We sat in silence, processing this. A 4-meter-tall bipedal predator with jaws strong enough to bite a man in half. It sounded like Tyrannosaurus rex, except T-Rex had been found in North America and Asia, never South America. And besides, T-Rex had been extinct for 65 million years. Hadn't it? What do you think they should do? Would you continue toward the lagoon or turn back? Let us know in the comments. There's another possibility, I heard myself say. What if it's not a dinosaur at all? What if it's something else? A large species of monitor lizard, perhaps, or an unknown species of bird. The terror birds, the phorusrhacids, they went extinct in South America only a few million years ago. What if a relict population survived in isolation? I was grasping at straws, trying to fit what we'd heard and what Miguel's cousin had written into a framework that made sense, that didn't overturn everything we understood about natural history. Henderson was nodding slowly. Possible. Or perhaps a large species of ground sloth, though they're typically quadrupedal. The point is, we won't. No, until we observe it properly, with scientific rigor, rather than panic-driven glimpses in the dark. If it is what Miguel's cousin described, Pritchard said carefully, our weapons may not be sufficient. Then we'll observe from a distance, Henderson countered. Chen, you have the telephoto lenses, correct? We can document it without putting ourselves in immediate danger. Chen nodded slowly, though he looked uncertain. The rivermen had their own rapid discussion in Portuguese. Finally, Paulo turned back to us. The men will continue with you to the lagoon, but we will not stay there. We will bring you, wait 1 day, only 1 day, while you make your observations, and then we leave, whether you are ready or not. And we will not go on to the land around the lagoon. We will stay with the boats. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than being abandoned entirely. Henderson agreed to the terms. None of us slept that night. We kept the fires burning high and took watches in pairs, rifles loaded, starting at every sound. But the jungle remained quiet. Too quiet. The unnatural silence that had fallen after the creature's cry never fully lifted. It was as if the entire ecosystem was in hiding, waiting for the apex predator to move on. Dawn came as a relief, though the morning mist rising from the Blackwater River created an eerie, dreamlike atmosphere. We broke camp quickly and pushed on. The river narrowed as we progressed, the vegetation closing in on either side. The canopy overhead grew so thick
that we seemed to be traveling through a tunnel of green twilight, even though it was midday. The water became almost ink black, and when I looked over the side of the canoe, I couldn't see more than a few inches below the surface. Pritchard was taking water samples and testing the pH. "Extremely acidic," he muttered, "between 4 and 5 on the pH scale. Basically the same as vinegar. Most fish can't survive in water this acidic." "But something could adapt to it," Henderson said. "If a population was isolated long enough, evolution would favor those individuals who could tolerate these conditions. It would create a perfect refuge, a place where modern species can't compete." It was sound evolutionary theory, but it did nothing to ease the growing sense of dread that had settled over our expedition. The jungle around us felt wrong. Not just quiet, but somehow aware. I kept having the sensation of being watched, though whenever I turned to look, there was nothing but the impenetrable wall of vegetation. Around mid-afternoon, João, who was paddling in the front of our canoe, suddenly held up his hand and spoke urgently in Portuguese. We all fell silent as the boats drifted to a stop. "What is it?" Henderson whispered. Paulo pointed to the riverbank ahead. "Smell." I inhaled and immediately understood. There was a stench in the air, thick and putrid. The unmistakable smell of decay, of death, but on a scale I'd never experienced. It was so strong it made my eyes water.
"Source?" Henderson asked, already reaching for his notebook. We paddled slowly forward, following our noses. The smell grew stronger, and then we saw it. The riverbank had been torn up, vegetation stripped away or trampled flat. Trees that must have been decades old had been pushed over, their trunks snapped like matchsticks. And there, half in and half out of the water, was a carcass. It had been a tapir, I thought, though it was hard to tell. The body had been savaged. Massive bite marks had removed entire sections of flesh. The rib cage had been crushed, the bones splintered. But what caught my attention, what made my blood run cold, were the tracks around it. 3-toed tracks, each one nearly a meter long, pressed deep into the mud. Theropod tracks. Chen was already setting up his camera, his hands shaking slightly as he attached it to the tripod. Henderson had jumped out of the boat, ignoring Paulo's protests, and was examining the tracks with manic intensity, taking measurements, making sketches. "Tridactyl, functionally 3-toed with a reduced hallux," he muttered, his voice shaking with excitement or fear, I couldn't tell which. "Weight-bearing digits, sharp claw impressions. My God, this is real." "How old are the tracks?" I asked, not entirely sure I wanted to know the answer. Henderson looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear mixed with wonder. "Fresh," he said. "Very fresh. Made within the last few hours, I'd estimate. The edges haven't dried yet, and there's been no rain to degrade them." "So it's close," Pritchard said quietly. As if in answer, somewhere ahead of us, deeper in the jungle, that sound came again. The hollow, resonant call that seemed to vibrate in our very bones. But this time, it wasn't alone. From a different direction, behind us, back the way we'd come, another cry answered it. There were 2 of them, and we were between them. Paulo spoke, his voice urgent. "Dr. Henderson, we must leave, now. If there are 2, they may be hunting together, driving prey between them. We cannot—" He stopped mid-sentence. We all heard it. The sound of something large moving through the jungle on our left, parallel to the river. Not crashing through the undergrowth like a panicked animal, but moving with purpose, with intelligence. branches breaking, the heavy thud of footfalls that shook the ground. It was pacing us. "Into the boats," Henderson said, his scientific enthusiasm finally giving way to survival instinct. Quickly, we scrambled back into the canoes, and the rivermen began paddling with desperate strength. The current was against us, but fear is a powerful motivator. We moved upriver, away from the lagoon, away from whatever was tracking us through the jungle. For 10 minutes we heard it keeping pace with us, just out of sight beyond the wall of vegetation. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. We drifted in silence, listening. The jungle around us remained quiet, waiting. "It's gone," Chen whispered hopefully. But Paolo was shaking his head, his face pale. "No, it has not gone. It is still there." "How do you know?" I asked. He pointed to the riverbank, to the trees. "The birds. Listen. When a jaguar moves through the jungle, the birds follow, calling out warnings. They tell the whole jungle where the predator is. But now, nothing. No birds, no monkeys. Nothing makes a sound." He was right. The silence wasn't the silence of absence. It was the silence of fear. Every animal in the jungle was hiding, staying perfectly still, hoping not to be noticed. "They are not warning each other about where it is," Paolo continued, "because they are too afraid to make any sound at all. That is how you know something truly dangerous is near, when the jungle itself is too frightened to speak." We kept moving, but now we were truly in a dilemma. Ahead of us lay the lagoon, and whatever made its home there. Behind us, we'd have to pass through the territory we'd just fled. And somewhere in the jungle, hidden but present, at least one, possibly two, apex predators were aware of our presence. Henderson made the decision. We push on to the lagoon. It opens into a wider body of water, according to the maps. We'll have better visibility there, room to maneuver. These narrow channels make us too vulnerable. No one argued, though I saw Miguel cross himself and begin praying quietly. The river bent ahead, and as we rounded the curve, the jungle suddenly opened up. We had reached the Blackwater Lagoon. It was both beautiful and terrible. The water was so dark it looked like polished obsidian, reflecting the surrounding jungle and the strip of sky above like a mirror. The lagoon was perhaps 200 meters across, fed by several small streams, surrounded by massive trees whose roots plunged into the dark water. Mist clung to the surface despite the afternoon heat, and on the far shore, where a small beach of dark sand met the jungle, we saw more tracks. Dozens of them, crisscrossing the sand, leading in and out of the water. This was its home, its territory, and we had just entered it. We anchored our boats in the center of the lagoon, as far from any shore as possible. It was an illusion of safety. We all knew that. Whatever lived here was clearly comfortable in the water, but the open space at least gave us warning time if something approached. Henderson wanted to go ashore immediately to examine the tracks, but the rivermen flatly refused to move the boats closer to the beach. The compromise was that Henderson, Pritchard, Chen, and I would take the smaller boat to shore while the rivermen waited with the main canoe. We had until sunset, about 3 hours. Then we would make camp on a small island we'd spotted near the lagoon's center, barely more than a sandbar with a few scraggly trees. As we rowed across the black water, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The surface was so perfectly reflective that it created a disorienting double image. Jungle above, jungle below, and us suspended between two worlds. Every ripple from our oars sent the reflection dancing, making it seem as if things were moving beneath us. "Look at the water clarity," Pritchard said, leaning over the side. "You can't see anything below the surface. The tannins make it completely opaque." "Perfect camouflage for an aquatic predator," I muttered, pulling my hand back from where it had been trailing in the water. The beach was worse up close. The tracks were everywhere, some fresh, some older and partially eroded. But it was their variety that disturbed me most. The three-toed prints we'd seen earlier, yes, but also others. Drag marks as if something heavy had been pulled from the water. Strange circular depressions I couldn't identify, and most unsettling of all, what looked like handprints, but wrong. Too large, with too many joints in the fingers. Henderson was in his element, measuring, sketching, collecting samples of what might have been dried saliva near one set of tracks. Chen was photographing everything, the click of his camera shutter unnaturally loud in the silence. "These behavioral patterns," Henderson was saying, mostly to himself, "they suggest intelligence. Look here. See how the tracks circle this area? It's been investigating something, perhaps hunting strategy, perhaps..." He stopped mid-sentence. We all heard it. A splash from the lagoon, too large to be a fish. We turned to look, but the black water had already settled back to its mirror-like state. Our boat bobbed gently where we'd pulled it onto the sand. Beyond it, maybe 70 meters out, the rivermen sat frozen in the larger canoe, all of them staring at the water around them. Then Paolo called out, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Something passed under the boat." "How large?" Henderson called back. "Large. Very large. Please, you must return now." But as we started gathering our equipment, Pritchard grabbed my arm. "Listen," he whispered. From the jungle behind us, barely audible. Breathing. Deep, rhythmic breathing, like bellows working in some massive forge. It was coming from just beyond the tree line, perhaps 20 meters away. We froze. Chen slowly, carefully, swung his camera toward the sound. Henderson had his hand on his revolver, though we all knew how useless it would be. The breathing continued for perhaps 30 seconds, though it felt like hours, then stopped. A moment later, we heard movement, something large retreating into the jungle, branches snapping, leaves rustling. Then, clear as day, I heard my own voice call out from the jungle. "Henderson, come quick! I found something extraordinary." But I hadn't spoken. I was standing right there, my mouth closed, my heart hammering in my chest. Henderson went pale. Chen's hands shook so badly, Nearly dropped his camera. "Vocal mimicry," Henderson whispered, his scientific mind still working even through his fear. "Like a lyrebird or a parrot, but that was perfect. That was exactly your voice, Caldwell." The voice called out again, my voice, but now I could hear something wrong with it, a slight distortion, as if it was being played through a broken phonograph. "Henderson, please, you need to see this. Hurry." "We're leaving," Henderson said, his voice cracking. "Now." We ran for the boat, threw our equipment in, and pushed off. As we rowed frantically back toward the main canoe, I looked back at the beach. For just a moment, I thought I saw something in the shadows between the trees. A shape too large to be human, watching us. Then it was gone, melted back into the green darkness. We made it to the island before sunset, though barely. It wasn't much, maybe 30 meters across, with a few stunted trees and some bushes. but it was surrounded by water on all sides, which gave us some comfort. We could see anything approaching, or so we told ourselves. The rivermen built a large fire in the center of the island. We arranged ourselves in a circle around it, backs to the flames, facing outward. No one spoke much. What was there to say? We'd all heard it, that perfect mimicry of my voice. It changed everything. This wasn't just some surviving prehistoric animal operating on instinct. This was something that could listen, learn, and deceive. As darkness fell, the lagoon transformed. The black water became absolute void, swallowing all light except for the flickering reflection of our fire. The jungle sounds that had been so notably absent during the day returned, but wrong, muted, distorted, as if heard through water. "We should post watches," Henderson said. 2-hour shifts, 2 men per shift. "I'll take first watch with Joao," I volunteered. I knew I wouldn't sleep anyway. Joao and I sat on opposite sides of the camp, rifles across our laps. Joao was young, maybe 19, and clearly terrified. He kept muttering prayers in Portuguese, fingering a small wooden cross he wore around his neck. For the first hour, nothing happened. The fire crackled. The others tried to rest, though I could tell from their breathing that no one was truly asleep. Then Joao stood up suddenly, peering out at the water. "Senor Caldwell," he whispered, "you see?" I looked where he was pointing. At first, just darkness. Then I saw them, 2 points of light reflecting our fire just above the water's surface, near the shore, maybe 20 meters away. Eyes. They watched us for perhaps 10 seconds, then disappeared beneath the surface without a ripple. "Wake the others?" Joao asked. I was about to say yes when I heard something that made my blood freeze. From the opposite shore, Joao's voice called out in Portuguese. I didn't understand the words, but Joao did. His face went white, and he took a step toward the sound. "Joao, no!" I grabbed his arm. "That's not real. Remember what happened on the beach? It's mimicking voices." But Joao was shaking his head, tears streaming down his face. "It speaks with my mother's voice," he whispered. "My mother, who died last year. How can it know her voice?" The voice called again, and even without understanding Portuguese, I could hear the maternal warmth in it, the concern, the love. Joao pulled against my grip, and I had to physically hold him back. "It's not her," I said firmly. "Think, how could your mother be here? It's the creature trying to lure you away from the fire." Joao collapsed to his knees, sobbing. The voice called once more, then went silent. The commotion had woken the others. Paulo came over and spoke quietly with Joao in Portuguese, then turned to us with a grim expression. "It did not speak with his mother's exact voice," Paulo said. "It spoke with Joao's memory of his mother's voice, the way he hears her in his dreams. He says it is not quite right, but close enough to hurt." "That's impossible," Pritchard said. "No animal could—" "We need to stop thinking of it as an animal," Henderson interrupted, and we all turned to look at him. His face was drawn, aged 10 years in the span of a day. Animals, even intelligent ones, mimic what they hear. This thing, it's doing something else. It's reaching into our minds somehow, pulling out the voices we most want, or fear, to hear. What would you do in this situation? Can the human mind even comprehend something that shouldn't exist? Share your thoughts below. That's not scientific, Chen protested weakly. No, Henderson agreed. It's not. But then, neither is a living dinosaur with the ability to perfectly mimic human speech. We're beyond science here. We're in territory that our rational minds aren't equipped to handle. The rest of the night was torture. The voices came from all directions, sometimes alone, sometimes in chorus. My father's voice, dead 15 years, telling me he was proud of me. Henderson's daughter, begging him to come home. Pritchard's wife, screaming for help. Miguel heard his cousin, the one who had died here, describing in horrible detail what had happened to him. But we held our positions. We stayed by the fire. We didn't listen, or tried not to. Then, just before dawn, Carlos stood up and walked to the water's edge. "Carlos!" Paolo shouted. "What are you doing?" Carlos didn't respond. He stood at the very edge of the island, staring out at the black water. We called to him, but he seemed not to hear us. Then he took a step forward into the water. Miguel and Paolo rushed forward, grabbing him just as he was about to take another step. They dragged him back to the fire, and that's when we saw his eyes, completely vacant, like he was sleepwalking. It took several minutes of shaking him before Carlos came back to himself. When he did, he looked confused, disoriented. What happened?" he asked in broken English. "You tried to walk into the water," Paolo told him. Carlos shook his head. "No, I was following the light. The beautiful light. It was calling me home." "What light?" Henderson asked urgently. "There was no light." "Yes, there was, floating above the water. Blue-white, like moonlight, but there is no moon tonight." We all looked at each other. None of us had seen any light. "It's targeting individuals now," I said, the realization making me feel sick. Showing each of us something different, something tailored to our specific psychology. "That's not possible," Chen said, but his protest sounded hollow even to himself. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. As the sky began to lighten, the voices faded, and the oppressive feeling that had weighed on us all night lifted slightly. But our relief was short-lived. As the morning mist cleared, we saw that we were surrounded. The tracks were everywhere, on every visible shore, on every beach. During the night, while we'd huddled on our tiny island, something, many somethings, had circled the lagoon. The trees at the water's edge showed fresh damage, branches broken at heights no normal animal could reach. And floating in the water, maybe 10 meters from our island, was Chen's equipment bag, the one he'd been certain he'd secured in the boat. "How did it?" Chen started. "Look at the boats," Pritchard interrupted. Both boats were still tied to the island, but they'd been investigated. Muddy prints covered the inside of the hulls. Our supplies had been rifled through, some missing, others scattered. But most disturbing of all, carved into the wood of the main canoe's side, in rough but recognizable letters, was a single word. "Leave." "It can write," Henderson said, his voice barely a whisper. "Dear God, it can write." That's when Miguel screamed. Joao was gone. We searched the tiny island. It took less than a minute to cover every inch. There was nowhere to hide. But Joao had vanished. His rifle was still there, leaning against the log where he'd been sitting. His blanket was still warm, but Joao himself was nowhere to be found. Paulo found the tracks leading from where Joao had been sleeping to the water's edge. But they weren't Joao's footprints. They were the three-toed tracks we'd seen on the beach, but smaller, more delicate. And between them, drag marks, as if Joao had been pulled or carried. He'd been taken in absolute silence from the middle of our camp while we were all within meters of him, and we'd heard nothing. Miguel was hysterical, alternating between prayers and curses. Carlos sat in shocked silence. Paulo stood at the water's edge, calling Joao's name over and over. Then, from across the lagoon, Joao's voice answered, "I'm here. Help me. Please, God, help me." But the voice was wrong. Too clear, too perfect. And beneath it, barely audible, was that sound. That hollow, resonant cry we'd heard that first night, but
quieter, almost like laughter. It was playing with us. Henderson turned to us, his face grave. "We have one chance. We make for the river now, all of us in one boat, and we don't stop paddling until we reach civilization." No one argued. We loaded what supplies we could salvage into the larger canoe, abandoned the smaller boat, and pushed off from the island. 6 men in a boat meant for 8, paddling desperately for the channel that would take us back to the river. We'd made it halfway when the water in front of us erupted. The thing that emerged from the black water defied every natural law I'd ever learned. It rose from the lagoon like some primordial god, water streaming from its body, and for a moment, one terrible, frozen moment, my mind simply refused to process what I was seeing. It was as if reality itself had torn, and something from humanity's collective nightmares had pushed through. The basic shape was theropod, yes, bipedal, massive skull, powerful legs, long tail for balance. But that's where any resemblance to the fossil record ended. This thing had evolved, adapted, changed during its millions of years of isolation. The scales weren't uniform, but varied in texture and pattern. Some smooth, like a snake's, others rough, like tree bark, providing perfect camouflage. Along its spine ran a series of quills or bristles that rattled as it moved, creating an unnerving sound like dried bones clicking together. But it was the eyes that destroyed what was left of my scientific rationalism. They were too intelligent, too aware. They didn't look at us the way a predator looks at prey. They looked at us the way a researcher looks at specimens. The creature stood perhaps 4.5 meters tall, water still dripping from its hide, which I now realized wasn't a single color, but shifted subtly, like oil on water, adapting to its surroundings. Its forearms were longer than any theropod fossil suggested, ending in hands, not claws, with an opposable digit. That's how it had written in our boat. That's how it had manipulated our equipment. Henderson raised his rifle and fired. The bullet struck the creature's chest with a wet thud, and I saw the impact, saw the flesh ripple. The creature looked down at the wound, then back at us, and I swear to God it smiled. Not with its mouth, the facial structure wouldn't allow for that, but something in its eyes conveyed amusement. Then it spoke. Not with vocal cords. I don't think it had them in the traditional sense. The sound came from somewhere deeper, resonating through its chest cavity and that specialized structure Henderson had theorized about. But what emerged was Henderson's own voice, perfect in every way except for a slight echo, as if 2 people were speaking in unison. Fascinating. You're trying to kill something you don't understand. How very human. Henderson's rifle fell from nerveless fingers. The creature tilted its massive head, studying us. Then it spoke again, this time in my voice.
You came looking for a dinosaur. But I am so much more than that. I am what comes after. I am evolution's answer to extinction. Miguel was screaming prayers in Portuguese. Paulo was desperately trying to start the motor we'd installed for emergencies, a small outboard that had been our insurance policy. It wouldn't start. The creature moved then, not charging but walking slowly along the shore, keeping pace with our boat as we paddled frantically. Its movement was wrong, too fluid, too controlled. Dinosaurs, as we understood them, were powerful but somewhat clumsy. This thing moved like a dancer, each step calculated and precise. "Where is João?" Paulo shouted. "What did you do with him?" The creature stopped, tilted its head again, a gesture that was becoming horrifyingly familiar, and João's voice emerged from its throat. "I'm here, Paulo. I'm part of something greater now. It doesn't hurt. Nothing hurts anymore." That broke Miguel. He stood up in the boat, raising his rifle, screaming incoherently. The boat rocked dangerously. Before anyone could stop him, he fired, not at the creature, but into the water around us, as if trying to ward off something under the surface. That's when we realized the truth. There wasn't just one creature. There had never been just one. The water around our boat began to roil. Shapes moved beneath the surface, large, dark, numerous. The creature on the shore made that hollow, resonant call, and it was answered from multiple directions. "They're hurting us," Pritchard said, his voice oddly calm, the tone of a man who has accepted his fate. "Like dolphins hurting fish. They've been hurting us this entire time." The boat struck something beneath the surface, something that had deliberately placed itself in our path. We spun sideways, and Carlos fell overboard with a splash. Paulo reached for him, but Carlos was pulled under so quickly, it was as if the water had swallowed him whole. He didn't even have time to scream. 3 seconds later, Carlos surfaced 20 meters away, gasping, swimming desperately toward us. We turned the boat, paddling hard to reach him. His hand was just reaching for the gunwale when something erupted from beneath him. Not the large creature, but something else, sleeker, built for water. It dragged him down, and this time he didn't resurface. The large creature on the shore watched all of this with those terrible, intelligent eyes. Then it did something that shattered what was left of my sanity. It laughed. Not a human laugh, but something that served the same purpose. A sound that conveyed amusement, satisfaction. It was enjoying this. The motor finally caught, sputtering to life. Paulo twisted the throttle, and we shot forward, toward the channel that led to the river. For a moment, I thought we might make it. Then the second large creature emerged from the water directly in our path. This one was different from the
First, smaller, leaner, with adaptations that were clearly aquatic.
webbed claws, a more streamlined build, gill slits along its neck that sealed and unsealed as it breathed. Evolution in action. Different environmental pressures creating different adaptations. Henderson stood up in the boat, and I saw something in his face I'd never seen before. Not fear, but a kind of terrible ecstasy, the look of a man seeing God and the devil at the same moment. "Magnificent," he whispered. "Absolutely magnificent. We were wrong about everything. Extinction isn't the end. It's just another selection pressure. And given enough time, enough isolation, life finds a way to continue, to grow, to become something new. The aquatic creature's head snapped toward him, drawn by his voice. Its mouth opened, dear God, the teeth, and from somewhere deep in its throat came Henderson's daughter's voice, the one we'd heard calling to him in the night. "Daddy, I'm scared. Please come home. Please, Daddy." Henderson took a step toward the edge of the boat. "No!" I grabbed him, pulled him back. "It's not her. You know it's not her." The creature in the water made a frustrated sound, not quite a roar, more like a hiss, and disappeared beneath the surface. We could see its shadow moving beneath us, massive, circling. Then, both creatures began to vocalize at once, but not with the hollow cries we'd heard before. They were using our voices, all of our voices, creating a cacophony of human speech that was somehow worse than any roar could have been. Henderson's lectures on evolution, my observations about plants, Chan's comments about his camera, Joao's prayers, Carlos's last words, all of it mixed together into a nightmare symphony. Chan had his camera out, still documenting even as tears streamed down his face. "Someone needs to know," he kept saying. "Someone needs to know what happened here." The boat's motor coughed, sputtered, died. Paolo pulled the cord desperately, but it wouldn't restart. We were 50 meters from the channel, so close to escape, but the creatures were closing in from both sides. That's when Miguel did something I'll never forget. He stood up, pulled out his cross, kissed it once, and dove into the water on the opposite side from the creatures. "Miguel, no!" Paolo shouted. But Miguel was already swimming, not toward the shore, but straight down. He was trying to draw them away, to give us time. It worked. The aquatic creature immediately dove after him, and the one on the shore entered the water with a splash that sent waves rocking our boat. We could see the dark shapes converging on where Miguel had disappeared. "Paddle!" Paolo screamed. "For God's sake, paddle!" We paddled with strength born of terror, making for the channel. Behind us, the water where Miguel had gone down began to turn red. We'd almost reached the channel when Miguel surfaced one last time. But it wasn't Miguel anymore. It was the creature, wearing something.
Like Miguel's form, but wrong. The proportions off, the movement unnatural. It spoke in Miguel's voice. "Thank you for bringing us new voices. We've been alone for so long, so very long. But now we know there's a world beyond the black water, a world full of voices to learn, to become." Then it smiled. God help me, it smiled with Miguel's face and sank back into the lagoon. We made it to the channel, but our relief was short-lived. The larger creature, the first one we'd seen, erupted from the water beside us, not attacking, but pacing us as we fled. It spoke again, using Henderson's voice. "You can leave. We allow it. But you'll never truly escape. You've seen beyond the veil now. You know that your science, your reason, your understanding of the world, it's all just a comforting lie. We are proof that nature has no rules, only suggestions, and we are not the only ones who survived. The deep places of the world hide many secrets." It kept pace with us for another 100 meters, then stopped at what seemed to be the boundary of its territory. But before it disappeared back into the lagoon, it spoke one more time, using all our voices in unison. "We'll be waiting. We have nothing but time. And now we have your voices to call out with, to bring others, to learn more. Evolution never stops, you see, never stops adapting, never stops becoming." Then it was gone, vanishing into the black water as if it had never been. We paddled in silence for hours, no one speaking, no one able to process what had happened. Chen clutched his camera like a lifeline.
Pritchard stared at nothing. Henderson had curled into himself, muttering about evolution and adaptation and things that shouldn't be possible. Paolo finally broke the silence. João, Carlos, Miguel, they're gone. We have to report this. We have to warn people. Warn them about what? I asked, my voice hollow. Who would believe us? Dinosaurs that can mimic voices? That can think and plan and enjoy the hunt? They'll say we went mad in the jungle. Heat stroke, bad water, group hallucination. The photographs, Chen started, will be dismissed as fakes or misidentified animals, Pritchard interrupted. You know they will. Henderson suddenly laughed, a broken sound. It doesn't matter, don't you see? It doesn't matter if anyone believes us. They're real. They exist. And they're learning. Every expedition that goes missing, every person who vanishes in the deep jungle, the creatures get new voices, new knowledge. They're evolving not just physically, but intellectually, using our own voices to understand us better. As if to confirm his words, from far behind us, carried on the wind, came a sound that froze my blood. It was João's voice, clear as day, calling out, "Help! Please help! We're lost! Can anyone hear us?" But João was dead. We all knew João was dead. The voice called out again, and this time it was joined by others. Carlos, Miguel, and other voices we didn't
recognize. How many expeditions had vanished in this region? How many voices had the creatures collected over the years, decades, perhaps centuries? We paddled faster. As night began to fall, we finally reached the main river, where the water ran clear and the jungle sounds returned to normal. But none of us felt safe. We knew now that safety was an illusion, that somewhere behind us, in the Blackwater Lagoon, ancient things with modern intelligence were waiting, learning, evolving, and they had our voices. The journey back to civilization took 8 days. By the time we reached Manaus, Henderson was catatonic, lost in his own mind. Pritchard left on the first steamer to England without saying goodbye. Chen developed his photographs, looked at them once, then burned them all. Some things, he said, shouldn't be documented. Paolo disappeared into the city. I heard later that he never went back on the river. And me? I wrote everything down, every detail, knowing that no one would believe it, knowing that it would be dismissed as the ravings of a man broken by the jungle. But sometimes, late at night, I hear them. Not with my ears, but in my mind. The voices of João, Carlos, and Miguel, calling out from the black water. And behind their voices, that hollow, resonant cry that haunts my dreams. Henderson was wrong about one thing. We didn't discover living dinosaurs in the Amazon. We discovered something much worse. We discovered what dinosaurs became when they had 65 million years to evolve in isolation. To develop not just physical adaptations, but something approaching consciousness, intelligence, perhaps even what we might call evil, though that's a human concept, and these things are anything but human. I'm writing this from my study in London, 18 months after our return from the Amazon. Outside my window, the city bustles with all the certainty of civilization. Carriages rattling over cobblestones, merchants hawking their wares, people going about their lives secure in the knowledge that the world operates according to fixed, understandable rules. They're wrong, of course, but I envy them their ignorance. Henderson died 3 weeks after we reached Manaus. The official cause was listed as fever, but I know better. He simply stopped eating,
stopped drinking, stopped acknowledging the external world. The last time I saw him, in that sweltering hospital room, he grabbed my hand with surprising strength and said, "They're still evolving, Caldwell. Every day, every year, they're becoming more. What will they be in another 100 years? Another 1,000? I had no answer then. I have no answer now. The authorities, such as they were, took our statements with a kind of polite skepticism reserved for sun-addled Europeans who've spent too long in the jungle. The loss of 3 rivermen was attributed to caiman attacks or drowning. The consul's report mentioned psychological distress brought on by isolation and
tropical diseases. Chen returned to Singapore immediately. We corresponded briefly, stilted, careful letters that danced around what we'd actually experienced. In his last message he wrote, "I still take photographs, but I can no longer trust what I see through the lens. If something that impossible can exist, what else might be hiding in plain sight?" I haven't heard from him since. Pritchard published a paper on the unique water chemistry of blackwater rivers, never once mentioning what we found there. But I noticed he resigned from the Royal Geographical Society and moved to the Scottish Highlands, about as far from any jungle as one can get in Britain. Paolo sent me a letter 6 months ago, written in broken English. He'd found work in a textile factory, he said, far from any river, but he added a postscript that chilled me. My cousin in Manaus writes that 3 more expeditions have gone missing near the Rio Negro. The rubber companies are avoiding that tributary now. The natives say the voices in the jungle have multiplied. They speak Portuguese now, and English, and other languages they don't recognize. I should have burned that letter. Instead, I've read it so many times the paper has worn soft at the creases. You see, that's what haunts me most. Not the creatures themselves, though God knows they appear in my nightmares often enough, but the implications of their existence. If evolution could produce such things, beings that transcend our understanding of what's natural, what else might be out there? What else might be watching us from the dark corners of the world, learning from us, adapting to us? I've done research since our return, quietly, carefully, in archives most scholars ignore. I found patterns, expeditions that vanish without a trace, native legends that speak of voices in the darkness, reports from early explorers that were dismissed as fabrications or hallucinations. A Portuguese missionary in 1743 wrote of demons that speak with the voices of angels deep in the Amazon. A Spanish conquistador's journal from 1551 describes his men being called into the jungle by their dead mothers. A British surveyor in 1856 reported finding the remains of a camp where something had written, "We learn," in multiple languages on the trees surrounding the tents. We weren't the first to encounter them. We won't be the last. Sometimes I wonder if we were allowed to escape, or if we truly escaped at all. The creature said we could leave, that they permitted it. Why? The only answer that makes sense terrifies me more than anything else. They wanted us to leave. They wanted us to carry the knowledge of their existence back to civilization, to spread the fear, the doubt, the crack in humanity's certainty about its place in the world. Or perhaps they wanted us to bring others. After all, each expedition that disappears gives them new voices, new languages, new understanding of the human world. I've tried to return to my work, Cataloging specimens at the British Museum, writing papers on conventional biology. But everything feels hollow now. How can I care about the classification of beetles when I know that our entire understanding of evolution, of nature itself, is fundamentally flawed? Darwin wrote about natural selection
as an blind, undirected process. But what we encountered wasn't blind. It was conscious, deliberate, aware. It had evolved not just physically but mentally, developing capabilities that our science says should be impossible. Voice mimicry perfect enough to fool the human ear, the ability to read and write, some form of telepathy or psychological manipulation that allowed it to pull specific voices from our memories. And most terrifying of all, it enjoyed what it was doing. That laugh still echoes in my nightmares. I've been seeing a physician for my nerves, as he delicately puts it. He prescribes laudanum for the nightmares, but I rarely take it. The dreams that come with the drug are worse than ordinary nightmares. In them, I'm back in the Blackwater Lagoon, but this time, I understand what the creatures are saying in their own language. And what they're saying is that they're already here, already among us, having learned enough from the voices they've collected to pass as human, at least for a while. Paranoid delusions, the physician says, a common after effect of traumatic experiences. But last week, something happened that stripped away my last vestige of doubt about what we experienced. I was at the museum, working late in the archive room, when I heard Chen's voice calling from the corridor. "Caldwell? Thomas? I've come back. I have something to show you." My blood turned to ice. Chen was in Singapore. I'd confirmed this through mutual acquaintances. There was no possibility he could be in London. I didn't answer. I turned off my lamp and sat in the darkness, barely breathing. The voice came again, closer. "Thomas, please. I've brought the photographs, the ones I didn't burn. You need to see them." It was perfect. Every inflection, every trace of his accent, exactly as I remembered. But underneath it, barely perceptible, was something else. That hollow, resonant quality I'd first heard at the Blackwater Lagoon. Footsteps in the corridor. Not quite right. Too heavy, but trying to sound light. "I know you're there, Thomas. I can smell you." That's new, isn't it? We've learned to smell humans. Each of you has such a distinct scent. Fear makes it stronger. I held my breath until my lungs burned. The footsteps paused outside the archive room door. The handle turned slowly. Then, from somewhere else in the building, a night watchman called out, "Who's there? Building's closed." The handle stopped turning. The footsteps retreated, quickly, too quickly, with a gait that wasn't quite human. I heard the watchman shout in alarm, heard running, heard a door slam. I waited an hour before leaving my hiding spot. The watchman was at
his desk, pale and shaking. He told me someone had broken in, but when he'd pursued them, they'd vanished like smoke. He'd found the exterior door open and wet footprints leading out into the rain. Footprints with 3 toes. I resigned from the museum the next day. I've booked passage to Australia, to the desert interior where there are no rivers, no jungles, no black water lagoons. Perhaps there I can find some peace. But even as I write this, I know it's futile. They're not confined to the Amazon anymore, if they ever were. They're learning, adapting, evolving, using the voices and knowledge they've gathered to expand their territory, their understanding. Henderson was right about one thing. We didn't discover living dinosaurs. We discovered the future. A future where humanity is no longer the apex predator, no longer the most intelligent species on the planet. A future where evolution has taken a path we never imagined, creating beings that are to us what we are to insects, incomprehensibly advanced, utterly alien, and absolutely terrifying. I leave this account as a warning, though I know it will be dismissed as the ravings of a madman.
But perhaps someone, somewhere, will read it and understand. Perhaps they'll recognize the voices that shouldn't exist, the footprints that don't match any known animal, the feeling of being studied by something that views us as we once viewed them, as specimens to be collected, voices to be catalogued, behaviors to be mimicked and ultimately improved upon. If you hear familiar voices calling from places where those voices cannot possibly be, do not answer. Do not ever answer. They have learned enough already. Caldwell's papers after his disappearance in the Australian outback, 1913. They're here too. Different form, adapted to the desert, but the same intelligence, the same voices. They've been here all along, in all the remote places, waiting. We thought we were exploring the unknown. We were really just walking into their classrooms. They thank us for teaching them. I can hear my own voice calling to me from the red desert. It promises understanding, evolution, transformation. I think I'm going to answer. December 3rd, 1913. Patient Thomas Caldwell was brought to our facility by London Metropolitan Police after being found in Hyde Park at 3 a.m., completely naked, speaking in what witnesses described as multiple voices simultaneously. Patient claimed to have just returned from Australia, though immigration records show no such recent entry. Physical examination revealed unusual scarring patterns on the patient's torso. 3 parallel marks repeated across the chest and back, consistent with large claw marks, but showing signs of having healed and reopened multiple times. Patient could not or would not explain their origin. Most disturbing, when sedated, patient continues to vocalize, but in voices clearly not his own, including female voices, children's
voices, and what our Portuguese orderly swears are words in his native language, though patient claims to speak only English and rudimentary German. Patient interview transcript. December 10th, 1913. Dr. Whitmore. Thomas, can you tell me where you've been for the past 6 months? Caldwell. I went to Australia, to the desert. I told you. I had to get away from water, from jungles, from them. Dr. Whitmore. But there's no record of your travel. Caldwell. Records can be changed, destroyed. They don't want you to know how far they've spread. They're in the institutions now, Doctor, learning how we organize, how we think, how we treat those who've seen the truth. Dr. Whitmore. Who are they, Thomas? Caldwell. Have you ever wondered, Doctor, why so many explorers go mad? Why they return from the dark places of the world with stories no one believes? We like to think it's the isolation, the heat, the diseases. But what if it's because they've seen what's really out there? What if madness is just the mind's way of protecting itself from truths too terrible to accept? Dr. Whitmore. You're deflecting, Thomas. Caldwell. No, Dr. Whitmore. He's trying to warn you. Dr. Whitmore. Patient's voice changed completely, requesting additional staff for future sessions. Caldwell. They're in me, Doctor. All the voices they collected, they put them in me before they let me go. João, Carlos, Miguel, and others. So many others. From expeditions going back centuries. I'm their library now, their living record of human voices. And through me, they're learning about this place, about how you treat those who've seen them. Dr. Whitmore. Thomas, I want to help you, but... Caldwell. You can't help. No one can help. We are evolution's next step. You are just the raw material. Session terminated as patient became increasingly agitated. Sedation required.
Night Staff Report. December 15th, 1913. Patient Caldwell must be moved to isolation. Other patients in the ward are becoming disturbed, claiming they hear their deceased relatives calling to them from Caldwell's room at night. 3 patients have attempted to enter his room, saying they were called. Additionally, the night porter reports seeing wet footprints in the hallway leading to and from Caldwell's room, though patient remains secured and the room's window is barred. Footprints do not match human feet, appears to be some kind of hoax, though how patient is accomplishing this while restrained is unknown. Dr. Whitmore's personal journal. December 20th, 1913. I've begun researching Caldwell's claims. There was indeed a Henderson expedition in 1911. Dr. Edmund Henderson died in Manaus of fever. The photographer, Robert Chen, committed suicide in Singapore 6 months after the expedition. Dr. James Pritchard is alive, but refused to respond to my inquiries. More disturbing,
I found similar cases in our archives. Explorers, missionaries, surveyors, all returning from remote regions with similar delusions about creatures that mimic voices. The symptoms are remarkably consistent across decades, even centuries. Either this is a very specific type of tropical psychosis or, no, I'm a man of science. There must be a rational explanation. But last night, I heard my mother calling from Caldwell's room. My mother who died when I was 7. The voice was perfect, down to the way she used to mispronounce my name when she was tired. I didn't go to the room. God help me, I wanted to, but I didn't go. Incident Report. December 24th, 1913. At approximately 2 a.m., patient Thomas Caldwell was discovered missing from his secured room. The door remained locked from the outside, the window bars intact. The only evidence of his departure was water on the floor, black water, according to the night nurse, though this seems unlikely, and marks on the walls that appear to be writing in multiple languages. Security searched the grounds thoroughly. No trace of patient was found. Of note, 3 other patients are also missing. All had been in adjacent rooms and had complained of hearing voices. Their rooms showed similar water traces and wall markings. London Metropolitan Police have been notified. Final report, Dr. Marcus Whitmore. January 15th, 1914. The Caldwell case has been closed. The patient is presumed deceased, though no body has been recovered. The other missing patients have likewise not been found. I am recommending that all documentation related to this case be sealed. The delusions expressed by the patient, while consistent and elaborate, could potentially be harmful if they were to spread. Mass hysteria is a documented phenomenon, and the specific nature of these delusions, voices that mimic loved ones, creatures that challenge our understanding of evolution, could prove particularly virulent. I am taking a leave of absence for my health. The strain of this case has affected me more than I care to admit. I find myself hearing voices that cannot possibly exist, seeing shadows that move independently of their sources. Perhaps a trip to the countryside will help. Somewhere far from London, far from rivers, far from the sounds of water. The London Times, February 3rd, 1914. Noted psychiatrist missing. Dr. Marcus Whitmore, respected physician at Lambeth Psychiatric Hospital, has been reported missing after failing to return from a holiday in the Lake District. Local authorities found his belongings at a cottage near Windermere, but no trace of the doctor himself. Peculiarly, locals report hearing voices calling from the lake on the night of his disappearance. Voices speaking in what witnesses describe as medical terminology and repeatedly asking for someone named Thomas. The search continues,
though authorities hold little hope. Modern addendum. Email from Dr. Sarah Chen,
University College London, dated October 15th, 2019. 2. Professor James Mitchell, Department of Cryptozoology Studies. Subject: The Caldwell Papers. James, I finished reviewing the documents you sent from the Lambeth Hospital archives. The consistency of the accounts is remarkable and disturbing. What's more concerning is what I found in modern missing persons reports from the Amazon region. In the past 5 years alone, there have been 17 expeditions that have gone missing in areas adjacent to the Rio Negro. Local guides now refuse to enter certain tributaries entirely. More interesting, a team from the Brazilian military allegedly encountered something in 2017 while investigating illegal logging. The official report is classified, but I have a contact who saw it. He won't give details, but he did say one thing that chilled me. They speak Portuguese perfectly now, and English, and Mandarin, and languages we don't recognize. I'm attaching acoustic recordings from a recent expedition that stayed at the edges of the forbidden zone. They captured vocalizations that don't match any known animal. Spectrum analysis shows they contain multiple overlapping human voice patterns. Sarah. P.S. I've had 3 other researchers contact me about similar findings in other remote regions. The Daintree Rainforest in Australia, the Darien Gap in Panama, the deepest parts of the Congo. If these accounts are to be believed, then whatever Caldwell encountered isn't confined to the Amazon. It never was. Final document. Handwritten note found in the Caldwell file. Author unknown. They walk among us now. In our cities, our institutions, our governments. They've learned enough. The mimicry is perfect. You've probably met one and never knew. They're patient, immortal, inevitable. Evolution doesn't stop. It just takes new forms. The black water was just the beginning. The classroom where they learned to be us. But better, stronger, smarter. Listen carefully to the voices around you. Notice when someone speaks with perfect memory of things they shouldn't know. Watch for movements that are almost, but not quite, human. Look for the intelligence behind the eyes that sees you not as a person, but as a specimen. They're not hiding anymore. They don't need to. We taught them too well. Thomas Caldwell was right about one thing. Don't answer when they call. But it's too late for that advice. We've all been answering for years. We just didn't know who was really calling. The Caldwell papers have been digitized and archived. The originals have been sealed at the request of various governmental agencies who claim no official interest in them. 3 researchers who worked on cataloging these documents have since reported unusual experiences. Voices calling to them from empty rooms, wet footprints appearing in their homes, the sensation of being watched by something that thinks differently. One researcher, Dr. Michael Torres, disappeared entirely. His final email contained only one line. They want me to come home, to the Blackwater, to evolve. We recommend no further investigation of this material. Some knowledge is too dangerous to pursue. Some evolution is too terrible to witness. Some voices should never be heard. But if you're reading this, it's already too late. They know you're interested. They know you're listening. And they have such wonderful things to show you. Do you think the creatures were truly defeated? Or are they still watching? Have you ever heard a voice you recognized calling from somewhere it shouldn't be?
Share your thoughts below, if you're certain it's really you typing them.